But do you trust the party you actually donate to deliver the goods? Afternoon to you, Dale.
Yeah, afternoon, Ian. Sounds like you've got a mad schedule tomorrow.
Yeah, it's bonkers. Are you going to come on with us for the full 18 hours?
I might have a cameo appearance.
Yeah, exactly. Julia loves you, by the way, as you know.
Absolutely. She invited me to come on at 12 o'clock, actually midnight, and I think I've already turned that one down.
Yeah.
But, me and Julia, we're not that best of friends, really. I don't get much chance to speak when I'm on with Julia. That's the problem.
That's part of the deal, apparently. So, so in terms of what you're hoping from this, obviously you've got hope, and you are optimistic that Keir Starmer is going to deliver the kind of things you've been talking about.
Yeah, I do. I believe that Labour gets the green economy, the massive economic opportunity that it is. It's the biggest one since the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution that we had, when we discovered burning coal, which is actually the driver of the climate crisis, ironically enough. And in contrast, of course, you've got Rishi Sunak wanting to dig more coal, drill more oil and gas, slow down green policies, and he argues that we can't afford them. They cost us money. When all of the research shows that the green policies that Cameron scrapped 10 years ago have added £15 billion to our energy bill. So the truth is quite the opposite of what the Tories are saying.
Why is that, Dale? Because I mean, people listening to this will go, hang on, you can't just wheel out a big old number without some kind of reason behind it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the report is published online. It's on my website, dalevince.com, and it was undertaken independently. And Cameron scrapped onshore wind. He took support from solar rooftops. He scrapped the energy efficiency program, and he changed the net zero carbon home standard for new build. And all four of those things have put energy bills up because wind and sun are, the cheapest forms of energy that we have available to us. Saving energy actually gives us the biggest return for every pound we spend, bar nothing. It's an even better return than building wind or solar projects. And zero carbon homes is about having super low bills through insulation, solar panels on the roof and stuff like that. Put it all together, it's £15 billion over 10 years.
Couple of questions before we go to some calls here. Many asking this. Alicia and others have made the point. What position or job have you been promised by Keir Starmer?
I love that. It's become a thing in the last kind of week, I would say. I keep either being asked it or just seeing on social media, oh, yeah, he's doing that because this, that, or the other. It's a silly thing to say. I think, honestly, I don't want to be rude to anybody, but I think it's a bit cheap. It's a bit shallow to say that. Because we're not all the same. There are many people in this world that do things because they believe in them, and that's what's happening here. I've been offered nothing. I've been asked to do nothing, doing everything that I do because I want to see a green government in Britain. It's so important.
Oik says, ask Vince, you know you're in trouble when somebody uses your surname. Ask Vince what his energy company do when there's no wind or sun.
Well, it happens, right? There are times, not whole days, there are times when we have less wind, more wind, no wind, and the same with the sun and stuff like that. But look, we're at nearly 40% renewable energy on the grid right now. We don't have blackouts. The National Grid themselves have said we can get to 100% without blackouts. So, this is an issue that's overdone, I would say.
So all of this is happening. The 40% has happened under the Tories, right? I mean, so they're doing surely what you want them to do, Dale. You're backing the wrong horse here, Dale Vince.
But that's the whole point. See, if Cameron hadn't banned onshore wind and took the support from solar, we would be powering 13 million more homes right now with green energy than we are now. So the renewables revolution actually started under a Labour government, under Tony Blair, and Cameron came along and pulled the rug out from underneath it.
Here's one from Isabella who says, why don't you ask Dale Vince to debate with experts who have evidence to the contrary to your views? Climate scientists are funded if they say the right things. Ones that aren't, who don't agree with the narrative, are called names and shut down.
Yeah, it's not like that, though, is it?
Are you scared of debating with experts?
No. Only fools, right? It's hard to debate with fools because they don't have facts. They just have prejudice and opinions.
Let's take a call. David is in Suffolk. David, you got a question for Dale? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, guys.
What's your question?
Net zero and all the other actions of activists are based upon there being existential evidence for a climate crisis. I find it strange that that is the case because when I go and read the actual IPCC reports, particularly Working Group 1, there is clearly no evidence for a crisis. The only sliver of support for a crisis is when the Working Group 1 scientists were asked to run the models, to put it crudely, up to 11 RCPA.
So worst case scenario models?
Not just worst case, extreme, i.e. every bit of fossil fuel in the ground is burnt before 2100. It's effectively impossible. Every other scenario that's a little bit less shows there's no crisis and therefore no urgency to rush with technologies that are still immature. So how do you justify a climate crisis when the scientific evidence in IPCC Working Group 1 is not there?
Dale?
Well, the UNFCCC, which is, a body of, it's got 180 nations in it or something like that. And every year they run this thing called COP, Conference of the Parties. And every year they get together and say, there's great urgency about us stopping the burning of fossil fuels and getting to net zero. These guys must also have read this IPCC report. And I think they've read it differently to you with respect. The 180 nations of the world are on board for the fact that we urgently have to change the way that we live.
188 nations, political activists. The scientists actually in the IPCC report have no solid evidence that there's a crisis. In fact, it's the opposite. It proves that there is no crisis. There's very little extreme weather, extreme, whatever you call it.
Seriously, the extreme weather is everywhere. Did you see what happened in Italy this week? Did you see the incredible floods in Italy?
Yes, and all this weather was also happening similar in the 1930s. This is not unusual. It's called natural variation. It's called nature.
No, it's not. No, we're having real extreme weather. Even here in Britain, we have incredibly wet months, incredibly windy months, incredibly hot months, and we're having them all in a row. We've just had the hottest 12 months on record globally ever. I mean, I am astounded that people argue there's no climate crisis. I really am.
I have to say, Dale, looking at some of the predictions, it's looking like more than a bit of a win, a thumping one by many of the polls so far.
Yeah, certainly the polls say that. What we don't know, of course, is the impact of the new voter ID restrictions that the Conservatives brought in. In the first by-election test of those new rules, 3,000 people were disenfranchised, unable to vote. If that translated nationally, it could be up to 1.5 million people that are unable to vote in an age group where most people tend not to vote Tory, which is the whole purpose behind it. So we don't know what impact that will have, I would say.
Let's take some more calls. And the reason why we have Dale on, and he's taking your calls, of course, whenever Dale or anyone comes on to talk about the environment, there's also always a load of calls and questions come through afterwards. And we thought, well, let's put the two together, put your calls directly, questions directly to Dale. Vince, this is John in Buckinghamshire. John, afternoon to you.
Excuse me, good afternoon. So thank you for taking my call.
Pleasure.
I'd like to ask Mr. Vince, I live in a two-bedroom semi-detached house in a very small village, and it's had cavity installation. It's had double glazed windows. The loft is insulated. We've had a new heat pump fitted, and we can't afford the electricity. My electricity bill during the winter is £15 to £20 a day. I know that because I have a smart meter. And all I ever hear Mr. Vince saying how cheap the green energy is going to be, I'd like to know when it is, because I'm a pensioner and I can't afford to use the central heating and cook the tea at the same time, because the smart meter tells me how much it's costing me and it's frightening me.
Yeah. How are we going to get the cost of energy down then, Dale? Because even if there is a suggestion that even if these green policies that you or the Labour Party are wanting to see in place, it could be many, many years, a decade or something before that translates literally to somebody's bill.
Well, the problem of our energy bills is driven by a dependence on fossil fuels. The energy crisis that we just experienced, and it's not over yet, peaked with bills of around £4,000 a year. That's entirely a fossil fuel-driven problem. The sooner we get off fossil fuels, the better. Labour have a plan to do it in the next 5 years. That'll have a big impact on bills. I don't know the circumstances precisely that we're talking about here, but heat pumps can increase energy bills. I mean, they do increase energy bills because It's complicated, a little bit complicated, but gas costs a quarter of the price of electricity, and a typical home uses 3,000 units of electricity and 12,000 units of gas. When you replace that gas use with a heat pump, you add another 6,000 units of electricity to the house, you get bigger bills by up to 50%. So I'm not a fan of heat pumps. I don't advocate them at all. But that might be the root of the problem, apart from the underlying fact that fossil fuels are very expensive. We don't set the price of them, even when we make them here in Britain. And right now, our bills are probably approaching 50% higher than they used to be before the energy crisis began.
I mean, just to clarify that point of, green energy, Dale, is there, can you see a day then when every single person's house is energised, heated and all that goes with it simply by wind turbines and solar panels?
Yeah, in terms of electricity, absolutely. Changing the heating of our homes is often referred to as decarbonising home heating. That's a big challenge. And Boris Johnson proposed the heat pump program. It's a completely illogical, I would say, uncosted idea. And when you look at the cost of it, we're talking about £300 billion nationally, plus about a 50% increase in everybody's energy bill, which adds £22 billion to our national energy bills. The whole thing is bonkers. Whereas we have an alternative, which is to make our gas from grass, and we can keep our appliances, our boilers, our cookers and stuff like that, just change the gas in the grid.
So lob grass in there, and what kind of goes through a process, and then the essentially the gas that's generated by whatever the process does to the grass will heat our homes.
Yeah, that's right. We use a process very similar to that of a cow's stomach, and we turn grass into methane the same way that a cow does. A cow leaks it out both ends, but we collect it and stick it into the mains because fossil gas is also methane. They're identical. Right. And so it's a perfect replacement. In the same way that we make green electricity from the wind and sun and we replace fossil electricity in that grid, we can do the same in the gas grid with gas made from grass.
So our homes will be heated by sort of a manufactured flatulence. Is that the suggestion?
There could be that. You could call it that, Ian.
Let's go. Thank you to John. Let's go to Mark in Swansea. This is on cars, Mark. Afternoon to you.
Afternoon. Well, it's carrying on from the heat pumps and other green technology that's obviously not working out in the real world. Why are we spending all this money messing about with green cars, all the plug-in points and what have you, and we should go straight to hydrogen? Why? It's like the Betamax, electric cars are a step backwards in technology and driving them and using them. Hydrogen, just the same.
Yeah, what about that, Dale? It does come up a lot. I know you've had this sort of question before. It does seem to be a bit of momentum around the hydrogen experiment. Why not?
Well, a lot of people talk up the hydrogen economy and how we can use it in our cars instead of batteries. Honestly, I don't understand it. It's like we're looking past the answer that we currently have, which is a really good answer. Electric cars, they're great to drive. They're very efficient, obviously completely clean at the tailpipe, so they're not poisoning people. 40,000 people a year in our country die, by the way, from traffic emissions. But look, hydrogen fundamentally will cost us twice as much per mile as a battery car will, fundamentally, because you have to take electricity and turn it into hydrogen, and then you turn hydrogen back into electricity in your car. So a battery car is 90-odd% fuel efficient. A hydrogen car is roughly 50%. Fundamentally, it's not suited to the job.
You say 40,000 people die because of emissions. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, it's a government statistic, so I assume there is.
I know that many have argued that actually when we talk about premature deaths because of what might be environmental, we're often talking about somebody who died, 18 hours sooner than they might have died statistically had they, lived somewhere else or whatever. So it doesn't mean they were killed by the exhaust pipe.
I think that's probably an unlikely extreme example that you quoted there, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that are getting late onset asthma and stuff like that. You remember the little girl recently? There was the first recorded death caused by traffic fumes in London. Anybody with asthma is really struggling already, but people even that don't have asthma will get it, will have breathing problems. I mean, these fumes are toxic. That's a fact.
We are getting cleaner, of course, it's fair to say, right? I mean, if you think about the environment we live in. Yeah, well, but even prior to you, I mean, don't mention ULEZ, because I mean, that's a whole other debate. We'll have another 10 hours on that one. But, we live in a world without smoggy chimneys in the way we used to have. We construct buildings in far more considerate ways. We recycle stuff. Lots of people drive electric cars. It's got to be better than it was a decade ago.
It's way better than it was a decade ago. And car emissions themselves, petrol and diesel emissions, are way reduced on what they were 20, 30 years ago. And that's because the industry were set targets by the government to do that.